Yeah, when you go through inside of a project, you inherit a whole lot of requirements and standards and how-to kind of manuals, and they're all there for good reasons, or they all evolve for good reasons. But it's not practical to inherit all these and say, here, I'm going to do this. I'm going to follow all these things and go do it. You just can't. Nobody can. So we went through kind of like a mini scrub and say, here's the bare minimum of requirements and standards that we're going to follow. And 7120 was not one of those. And a bunch of other engineering standards were not in there as well. We said, well, just follow these. And if we just do that, then we'll be good. And there was a big discussion, gnashing of teeth, what's the right one? Everyone has their own favorite, NPR and their own favorite standard. In the end, we got to a decent set. It was late. It was a year and a half after the project started that we got some of the stuff written down. But at least it got written down. The one thing that was not there was SMA requirements. We had just very nebulous, top level, we'll do good SMA things kind of stuff. And that was a mistake. We should have done it earlier. Luckily, we got a very strong SMA lead, Dan Mullane, who understood up front that we can't go much further with this SMA requirements because it'll bite us in the very end. So we spent a very, very painful summer of 2007. Spent hundreds of hours, going through and just discussing, debating, arguing about what is appropriate for SMA requirements for a flight test. And the initial stuff that came in was much more, what I would say, was a human spaceflight approach. It's easier for people to take, here's what we're doing for shuttle, we'll just cross off those things we're not going to go use. The other approach is, well, here's a clean sheet of paper, let's add those things that we are going to go do. Well, you don't get to the same point when you do that. You never get to the same point. So if you go bottoms up, top down, or start from a clean sheet, or go back from shuttle, you'll never get to the middle. You're always going to be different from each other. And that's where we were. And we were different from each other. But after spending, like I said, days and days and days going through this, we finally found a place to negotiate. And it really was, word for word, requirement for requirement, we negotiated what it meant to go do this. And we put as much wording and verbiage as we could in our requirements document, so people, or safety requirements, so people understood, here's what we mean by this.
One of the good lessons within first stage was how we conducted reviews. And we recognized early on that we didn't have time, because of the schedule pressure, to have a PDR type review and a CDR type review. It just wasn't the time. So we kind of created a hybrid review. We called it an MDR, a manufacturing design review. And there was a lot of skepticism up front about that within our team, within even the MMO team, on what that really meant. The idea was to create this hybrid review and to really get out of the stereotypical PDR, CDR mentality. Not that we were trying to cut corners, but there's certain requirements and certain rules that when you say I'm going to conduct a CDR, that your engineering community expects to see. So we didn't necessarily want to get caught by that. So we created this hybrid review, and it worked really well for us. We essentially combined a PDR and CDR, called it an MDR, and it was worked really well. And if we had to do it over again, another test flight, I think we would try the same kind of thing. We had a similar thing for hardware acceptance. We didn't have time to conduct pre-ship reviews, acceptance reviews, and DCR reviews serially. So we essentially created what we called a HAR, a hardware acceptance review, where we did most of those functions within that one review. And that worked well, worked pretty good as well. And if we had to do it over again, we'd probably do the same thing. But we're smarter now, and we would probably conduct those reviews a little differently. We would probably, the timing of it might be a little different, but all in all, those were good moves, I think, by the first stage team. If I had to do it over again, call it a lesson if you want to, was the requirements flow down and how they were controlled. Of course, the systems requirements were developed in the early days of the project, and they were controlled by the XCB, or the MMO level, the Bob S level. They also controlled the next level of document that came out of that, the element requirements documents. All the elements had one. ROCS had one, First Stage had one, Avionics had one, First Stage had one, CMLAS had one. I think I got them all. So typically, the element controls that level at their boards. For 1X, that was not the case. It was controlled at MMO. That caused us a lot of problems within first stage. The document that flowed out of the SRD for first stage was really bigger than an element requirements document. It was more or less CEI spec to control end item specification. So it had more than just the allocated requirements from the system to first stage. So, and that gets back to the contractual situation. That was a contractually controlled document from the first stage perspective. So what we were getting into was a cycle of approval of that document. You had MMO saying, we control it, we're the approval authority, but then you've got the first stage manager, which is my boss, and the COTR on the ETK contract saying, no, we are the board that controls that document because it's a contractual document. So I got into this loop. So, for example, if I had to change that document, so which board do I go to first to approve these changes? So, I tried it both ways. So one time I would run the change through the first stage board, get it approved at that level. So once I got all the comments disposition and approved there, before I could put it on contract, I then had to go get it approved by the MMO level. So what if I got different comments, different changes? I had to run it back through the first stage board. So I'd get into this loop that it was hard to get out of. It also rippled into the verification world too. And we had the VRD, which was the verification requirements document, verification of our ERD requirements. Same thing there. They controlled that at the MMO level. It just caused us a lot of configuration management issues and a lot of probably time spent that could have been spent better elsewhere. So that's my biggest, and I'm not sure Bob agrees with me on that. If we had to do another test flight, I think his position would be he would still want to control it the same way. I would fight it, and and I would definitely do it differently if we did another test flight in those and MMO decided to control the element requirements. I would probably create kind of a middle document that was just the allocated requirements from the SRD to first stage and let that be the document that MMO controlled. And then out of that, I would have my lower level additional derived CEI spec type document. What that does is adds another document to the mix, but it would get us out of this, two boards controlling the same document.
When approaching our acceptance review, we had an audit from NASA headquarters, and the auditor happened to be the fastener expert for NASA. He discovered a discrepancy between our center directive and the agency level directive, resulting in a couple of shortfalls or requirements we had failed to meet per the agency guidelines. It wasn't a clear, succinct link between the two documents, but it was valid, so we certainly had to address it, and it did cause lots of concern for us for meeting our flight status, our acceptance. If they weren't accepted, then this hardware could not be certified for flight use, and that would have been the end of the project. So lots of scrambling, lots of support, working from the mission manager all the way down through our safety mission assurance folks who did lots of extra hours, and we were able to track down, resolve, and go back and actually test the fasteners that we hadn't tested appropriately per the NASA standard. Lesson learned is to ensure, verify that your center directives are in step fully with the agency level. It's something I will check in future projects, but in addition, our chief engineer at Langley has also gotten involved. He does the reviews of these, and he is holding reviews to ensure that very thing. But it's something that definitely could have just stopped us right in our tracks if we hadn't caught it and hadn't been successful at the last minute to get everything cleared up.
Then as we went on, we were great. Then the programmatic requirements, the NPRs, the 7120, 7123, those things started becoming back up. People in NASA, because they wrote it, assume you're going to follow all the requirements as written. And that would be nice in an ideal world. But we just went through, used those documents as guidance.
All those NASA standards out there that we have to follow, notice they say they're standards. They don't say they're a rule book. To me, now, these are guidelines. And as he told us, and as I now completely adopt this philosophy, those are guidelines. If they don't make sense, let's talk about why they don't make sense, and then we're not going to go do them. But the NASA culture tends to be, okay, these standards that we have as a NASA entity, were learned through decades of experience and failures. And so what you see is year after year, you pile these things on top, and you come up with these huge bureaucracies and these long processes you have to go through. You don't need them for every project you go do, especially on Ares 1X, which was just an unmanned flight test. There's a lot of that stuff we don't need to go do. So you look at it, very cold and calculating and say, I really don't need that, or that does make sense for what we are doing. So as long as we're able to go through and cherry pick the ones that are right for us, not the ones that are convenient or the easiest to go do. You have to be really smart, technically brilliant about it. Go choose the right ones. Go do those, but the others don't go do them, because that's what's causing all the other major programs to take so long. Now, maybe they have to live with that overhead. I would tend to think they could probably eliminate some of that, but they're trying to be smart, and so they can say, if there ever is an incident, well, we followed the guidelines. No, if you were smart, maybe you don't follow all those guidelines. You follow the ones that make sense. And so everybody else, I don't care what size your project is, don't feel like you have to follow those rules. Be smart.
And it took a while. We had to push hard. Folks at headquarters and Constellation program weren't always in sync with us as to what the right thing to go do is. But in the end, we got to a part that was good enough. It wasn't great. I think we could have been leaner in the approach. Other folks think we should have been a little more heavier in following 7120 to the letter. So if you tend to disagree like that, you're probably somewhere in the middle, which is okay.
As we wrote a project plan at the beginning, where we laid out to where we said we were going to use 7120.5, which is a project management for type of projects, as guidance, but we were not going to be bound by necessarily following it exactly. So we gave our ability to kind of tailor it. I'm not so sure that we didn't do ourselves a disservice in just saying, hey, let's go follow it, because then I'm thinking some of the problems we had later on as we talked product versus design, as to what language and what type of requirements might have been resolved if we just agreed better off to just follow that. So that to me is another lessons learned. If someone in the future is going to embark upon a project or a test flight or whatever you want to call it of this scope over that long a period, I would caution them to please be very careful when they want to start thinking that instead of following a process that the agency's invested a lot of time and manpower and experience in, when they want to tailor it because maybe it just makes it easier for us, where in the end I'm going to say I'm not so sure doing that made it easier for us. And I think it's very valuable for any team to put a small team together at the very front that says, here's the ins and outs of requirements, here's a process that we're going to follow, and here's when we're going to do it. I mean, if they're going to do an incremental kind of, as you get to this phase, let's close out these requirements. But whatever it is, get the team and its team management leadership to all agree that's what we're going to go do and communicate it early.